The second method, the backstitch cast-off, is one that can be used on finished edges that will be visible. Measure a length of yarn 3 times the width of your knitting and cut it. Thread it through a darning needle. Notice that Sue ended with her carriage on the left and will be working from left to right with this bind-off. Insert the needle into the second stitch, bringing it back through the first stitch. Pull the yarn through. Now through the third and back through the second. She'll work this way all the way across the row. When you reach the last stitch, pull the yarn through to fasten it off and remove the knitting by pulling all the needles forward to holding position. Then push the needles back to non-working position. Your knitting will automatically drop off. Sue is now going to show you one way to add ribbing to your knitting as you would at the bottom of a sweater piece. She's going to work the same number of needles as she did with her piece of knitting, but she's arranging them so that there are 2 forward and 1 back all the way across the row. Put the yellow card between the needles to keep the forward needles in holding position. Pick up the cast-on row of stitches and hook them onto the needles. To do this, pick up the first 2 stitches and hang them on the last 2 needles. Leave the 3rd stitch in the elastic thread and hook up the 4th and 5th. Continue hooking up your stitches this way across the row, leaving every 3rd stitch in the elastic thread. Be sure that you're getting the stitches there and not the little loops that are between the 2 stitches. Remove the yellow card and push the needles back into working position. You just move the whole weighted hem there. Rethread the carriage and knit regularly until you have the number of rows you need for your ribbing. You end up with a series of ladders. With the latch hook tool, hook facing down, pick up the 3rd stitch which you left attached to the elastic thread. Turn the tool over so that the hook is up, and push the stitch behind the latch. As you bring the tool back, pull the first rung of the ladder through your stitch. Hook up the remainder of the ladder in the same way. Forward, back, forward, back. When you reach the top, hook the new stitch onto the empty needle. Here, Sue is latching up some stitches at the other end of her knitting at normal speed. Use the backstitch method to cast off this style of ribbing. Remove the knitting from the machine. See how she jiggles that a little bit sometimes. Remove the knitting from the cast-on hem by either gently pulling through the nylon cord or gently pulling the knitting away from the hem, snipping the elastic as you go. Notice how Sue is tugging lengthwise on her knitting. While it's on the machine, your knitting is stretched wider than it will be when it's finished. Her tugging helps the stitches come back to the shape they want to be in naturally. Sue will show you some decorative stitches starting with the lace or eyelet stitch. Transfer the first stitch to the adjacent needle just as you did for the decrease. Bring the empty needle forward into holding position and knit one row. Push the needle back to forward working position, making sure the latch is open. Knit one row. That makes an eyelet. Many eyelets make a lace pattern. Sue is making a V-shaped pattern. You can position the lace anywhere on your knitting and can arrange the eyelets to make a wide variety of patterns. Latch is open, and she knits back. Now Sue will show you the tuck stitch. This is a very simple stitch that creates texture. Push into holding position the needles you want to be tucked. Sue pushed out every 10th needle, leaving 9 working needles between the ones she wants to tuck. Knit 2 rows. Pull down on the knitting, then push the needles back, checking that the latches are open. Whenever those needles are in forward working position, the latches must be open. Knit 1 row. Position the needles for the next row of the pattern by pushing them into holding position. She's using the center stitch of each group of 9 that she left. Knit 2 rows. Pull down on the knitting and push the needles back to forward working position. You can place tucks anywhere on your knitting, and by arranging them in an organized way, you can create hundreds of patterns. The purl side becomes the right side of these fabrics. Fair Isle is a method of knitting more than one color in a row. It's sometimes called jacquard or stranded knitting. Start by pushing into holding position the needles where you would like the contrasting color. Sue will knit her contrast color on every 3rd needle. Always knit the main color first by pushing the carriage slowly across the row. Then you'll knit the contrast color manually. Make sure that these stitches are the same size as the rest of your knitting. Notice that she's not pulling too tightly, nor is she leaving big loops. Make sure as you lay the yarn into the latch that it's open. When you finish that first row, attach a clip to the new yarn end. Then, select the needles for the contrast color of the second pattern row. Sue's moving 1 needle to the right on each row to form a diagonal pattern. Knit across with the main color, then manually knit the contrast color across the row. Look at the nice rhythm she has. This is how the back looks with the contrasting floats carried between the pattern stitches, and this is the right side. Sue will now show you how to knit a 6-stitch cable. Remove onto waste yarn 1 stitch on each side of the 6 needles that you're going to use for the cable. Push the empty needles into the non-working position.